Hello everybody and welcome to Strategy, a YouTube series that is dedicated to helping teams climb the rank 5's ladder by improving their ability to work together as well as providing them with the methods that can help develop their thinking and playstyles. My name is Vedius and today we are going to discuss advanced picking methods to conclude this segment on the draft phase. The ideas that I will discuss are a development on part 2 of this series that focused on basic picking strategies. These more advanced ideas will be necessary when attempting to reach the higher levels of the rank 5's ladder. A link to the previous episode will be available if you haven't checked it out already. We're going to be looking at 6 different methods that can change up how you choose to play out your draft phase. These are the order in which you prioritize roles, the 4th ban, the flex pick, the bait pick, the lane swap, and the cheese pick. Some of these strategies may be familiar to you already, therefore if you want to skip ahead, timestamps are available in the description below. Starting with the order. Often you will argue with your teammates about what role should actually be prioritized. In my previous teams, every player wanted to save their pick to be able to counterpick. Obviously, this is not possible. Therefore, I'll give you some general rules of thumb that you can use when deciding what to prioritize. The first rule of thumb is to pick up the strongest champion on the current patch, assuming you can play it. If you recall to earlier in Season 5, AP Ezreal became Flavor of the Month because of how insanely strong he was. Early rotating these champions regardless of role is often a good way to start. Assuming that there are no power picks available, securing strong or comfort non-solo laners is a great way to start your draft. The main reason for this is that your solo laners are a large contributor to the direction of your team composition. Therefore, saving them for as long as possible is the most ideal situation to result in the strongest possible draft. To illustrate how common this method is, I went through all of the games for Group B of the World's Group Stages and looked at what roles were prioritized and what roles were delayed. Of the 13 games that were played, Jungle was the most common first pick. If it wasn't first picked, a power pick was prioritized, which, given the current patch, was usually Darius. The other thing to note is that mid and top were the most commonly chosen last picks for both sides. This is a clear illustration of how where you choose to prioritize roles is often an important thing to take into consideration during the draft. There were a few other interesting patterns, and I would recommend you check out the full breakdown that is available in the description below. Moving on to the 4th ban. This strategy will only work if you know the opponents that you are playing against, which you often won't when climbing the 5's ladder, but is still a useful strategy to know nonetheless. You may find that your opponents have too many threats that are worth banning away, but due to the number of bans that you have, that might not be possible. To remedy this, you can ban the major threats while leaving one open to pick for yourself. Therefore, you effectively deny that champion from your opponent. There are many examples of players in competitive play being so renowned for their effectiveness at a champion that it is banned almost every game. Some notable names are Balls' Rumble, Peekaboo's Janna, and Bang's Kalista. Speaking of, take a look at the World Group Stage match between SK Telecom and Edward Gaming. Edward Gaming is still attempting to figure out the world's patch and decide to ban away both strong and well-rounded champions alongside a target ban towards Wolf's Alistair. They also recognise that, competitively, Bang is undefeated on Kalista at this point in time and do not want to give it to him. Therefore, they prioritise it over strong picks like the Rek'Sai and Darius because they believe taking that champion away from Bang is far more important. Up next is the flex pick. This is another common strategy that is seen regularly in competitive play. The general idea is that you pick a champion that can fill multiple roles. By doing this, it makes it harder for your opponent to figure out and adapt to your composition, thus allowing you to put that champion into the most advantageous position. A great example of flex picks being used can be shown in the Invictus Gaming vs AHQ game during the World's Group Stages. I want to draw your attention to IG's Shen pick. During this patch, Shen worked as both a top and a support. Because of the ambiguity that this pick brings, HQ decide to hold on to their top lane pick to get the counter pick. IG then follow this up with a Kennen pick, who can fill every role except for jungle. In this instance, AHQ won't know for sure whether Kennen is support or top until the draft concludes. This leads them to choose a safe pick in Maokai, giving IG the advantage of a free lane for whichever champion they decide to run top. Our next strategy is the bait pick. This is almost the opposite of the fourth ban strategy in the sense that you want your opponents to pick a certain champion rather than picking it for yourself. You would typically do this when you have a comfortable niche strategy prepared to deal with that specific pick. One of the most famous examples of this is Faker's LeBlanc. Looking back at the mid-season invitational where SK Telecom and Edward Gaming met in the finals, we know that Faker was competitively undefeated on his LeBlanc, and it was considered mad to ever give it to him. Every game prior to this one, Edward Gaming had banned LeBlanc, but had left it available for this final game of the series. Faker takes it very early on into the rotations, which plays beautifully into Edward Gaming's plans. They build a composition with the sole intention of dealing with the LeBlanc pick. The Morgana mid lane typically provides LeBlanc with a difficult laning phase, due to constantly being shoved into tower, as well as the black shield to mitigate the single target damage. They also have a large amount of single target crowd control to lock her down in teamfights. Not only that, assuming that Faker can even get past the strong frontline of Edward Gaming, he has to get through Evelyn's large shield and slow, the spell shield of Sivir, as well as the black shield provided by Morgana once again. This whole composition was designed with making Faker's life difficult, and he walked straight into it as a result of his overconfidence on the champion, as well as picking his mid laner very early on in the rotation. Something that you always have to consider is the possibility of a lane swap. If you decide on a bot lane pair that is a weak laning phase but scales very well as the game progresses, you should aim to guarantee that your top laner has a favourable matchup. This results in at least one winning side lane regardless of whether you or your opponents decide to go for a lane swap. To explain this a little more, I want to show you the Game 2 draft between AHQ and SK Telecom during the Worlds quarterfinals. In this situation, purely based on the matchups, AHQ should win the bot lane and SKT should win the top lane. This mismatch means that if either team decides to lane swap, they will be redistributing who they focus their golden experience onto. If a lane swap occurs, then the weaker lanes for both teams will get through the early game safer, and if no swap occurs, SKT will have a stronger top laner and AHQ a stronger AD carry. And so, this underlines the importance of SKT recognizing during their draft that they have a weaker bottom lane, so they compensate with a winning top lane. Last but not least, the cheese pick. This method works wonders in solo queue if you can execute it properly. Cheesing involves picking a champion that is usually not seen in competitive play, but has a very unique niche that can heavily swing games in favour of your team. I would recommend that if you are going to cheese, that you save it for one of your later rotations, otherwise it can backfire quite heavily. To demonstrate this, let's take a look at the CLG vs KOO Worlds group stage match. In an attempt to take advantage of the low mobility Ashe pick made by KOO, CLG decide to opt into an uncommon Blitzcrank pick. They may have been able to make it work, but because they picked it so early on in the draft, it was very easy for KOO to respond with the Morgana. This champion completely denies the niche that Blitzcrank brings as long as she can black shield the correct target, which, at this level of play, Gorilla usually does. This resulted in Blitzcrank having little to no impact on the game, which significantly hurt CLG. As initially stated, these methods are an expansion of the previous strategy video focused on basic picking methods. I recommend that you experiment with each method if you're a developing team, but the important thing is to be aware of these strategies as many experienced teams will rely on these methods during the draft phase. That does conclude this 3-part series on the draft phase. If you've enjoyed and would like to keep up to date on any future videos, then feel free to subscribe or check out my other social media. If you have any suggestions for future videos or constructive feedback, please leave them in the comment section below. With that, best of luck on the ladder and have a good one.